So, two things, right? A brain cell or a neuron needs. I'm gonna go like this. It needs to be activated, and it needs fuel. What's the fuel?
Blood glucose.
What is it?
Isn't it blood glucose, all of that to help function?
Anything else?
Oxygen?
Yeah, super important. But yeah, blood flow, right? So what do we use to get this to the brain? Our autonomic nervous system. And then what do we use to get this to the brain cells? All the neurological treatments that you do. So neuro rehab, chiropractic, the spinal input to the brain is super important to activate these brain pathways. All the other things we do, PT, that type of stuff, are all designed to specifically activate this area. So this, whatever area we're working on, is the weaker part of the brain, right? It's that weaker area. It's what we found in our testing. It's what we found in everything. And it's not just one, it's a group of them. But what happens when we do activate these things, when we give them oxygen together in the right manner, in the right combination, is they start to make more connections with their neighboring neurons, right? They start to make stronger pathways to other parts of the brain. And when they do this, what happens is, in order to give, or in order to receive, you must give, right? That old thing. So now information starts coming back. They're not just sending it, it's coming back. So you start to create this really efficient network of communication in the brain that actually self-activates self-serving in a way, right? It creates its own health. So you create this healthy area by attacking the weaker area, which is the one that's most impacted. It's the one that's holding back everything else. And when you do that, right? So we also talked about yesterday. We talked about what is like when a neuron, right? What happens when we have these overactivities, right? Well, why do we sometimes get super sensitive to things, right? Why are we super sensitive to light, sound? Why if we do a certain treatment with somebody too quickly, they'll be pushed over the edge. Their symptoms will get way worse.
Action potential?
Well, kind of, right? Yeah, it's that graph, the threshold, right? So you're exceeding their metabolic capacity. So this is metabolic capacity. It's how much can you handle? So if a neuron, this is what she was mentioning, which is this is your action potential. This is the line you have to get to. This is 0 to send a signal to anywhere in the brain. This is where neurons should hang out at about negative 65 to 75 millivolts. But notice they're negatively charged. When neurons don't receive enough activation or fuel, they start to become more positive. And that's not a good thing. Yeah. So what happens is this activation, this fuel that's going to this neuron, it doesn't just make new connections with the neurons. It also creates new sodium-potassium pumps, which pump in, they pump out more positive than they do pump in, and so they create a negative environment within the cell, which is what we do want. However, if we don't activate this neuron enough, we lose these things, right? So just like if we activate the neuron, we get more healthier, parts of that cell. We get, the organelles, right? They're called, right? You get more mitochondria, you get more ribosomes, you get more lysosomes, you get more all the things you need. So do potassium pumps, all the things you need for it to function healthy. Well, if you don't activate it, the opposite is true. You start to lose all those things.
Like you don't use it, you lose it.
Like you don't use it, you lose it. Exactly. So that's what this is the reason underpinning reason behind it. So as this cell becomes more positive, because you're not making it negative, it like, think about it like it naturally wants to pull to positive, right?
We have to work to keep it negative.
Exactly.
Okay.
It always wants to go there.
Okay.
It's like you walk by, your favorite morning pastry. Like you want that thing. You just have to like compel yourself not to have it.
Yeah.
Your brain says, you don't need it. Probably not today. Whatever. So it's the same idea here. It's a healthy brain. Or when you're overtired, you're like, nah, whatever, I eat it, right? You notice that when you're more tired, you don't make better decisions. When your brain is less healthy, it's not making better decisions, right? Or it's not functioning as well. So when you lose this, you start to lose these sodium-potassium pumps, and you lose the ability to make as many mitochondria, which make ATP, which would fuel these sodium-potassium pumps. The cell becomes more positive. And so here, the graph of this looks like this, right? It starts this resting membrane potential, this resting state. Of the neuron, it comes up, it rises, and it just becomes more positive and positive. It's still in the negative area, but it's less negative. And so now what happens is it starts to get close enough, it becomes really easily stimulated. So like these lights are on, and I'm like, oh, it's giving me a migraine, right? Or, oh, these lights are on, I'm getting like tired, my brain's fatiguing, like I'm just, or I'm like irritable or whatever it might be, right? So when we go in and we perform activities in that area, even though this is like being stimulated more and sending too much of a signal, it's actually unhealthy. Okay? Yeah, it's like kind of paradoxical, but that's the way it works, right? And now, also, you can have neurons that are just like weakly stimulated, right? They're not, they don't all necessarily do this from day one, right? This is usually after a little while. Yeah, it's been there for some time, or it's severe enough, or whatever the circumstance. Regardless, when we go in there, we don't go in there just guns a-blazing, right? And we can't just overactivate things, right? So one example is a patient that we had where she, a lot of patients you see, we don't start with any convergence activity, right? It's all divergence, it's all easy stuff. And we don't even start with that until we treat them for X amount of time, until their system is better anyway. But this patient, she had a convergent spasm, right? So when you came in close, her eyes went like this. So that's overactive, right? That system is really close to threshold. So what was happening when they were doing therapy somewhere else is that they were giving them exercises to stimulate that thing. And so that was just driving her symptoms and like creating these just terrible patterns. And so when we removed that, we realized that's one of the things they were doing. We removed that, and it was, of course, really helpful. It took a little while, though. We still had to reset the system. But they were driving this system more than it could handle because it was so close to threshold. So what you have to do with that is you have to kind of go in the side door on these ones, right? You have to start increasing fuel and oxygen first through things like tilt table therapy that we do, right? And vestibular activation, because that fuels the autonomic nervous system and starts to send a lower grade, a less amplitude of signal in the way we do it with those repositioning maneuvers, are resetting the frequency and activation of the brainstem in different areas, as we've discussed a little bit, which is in a plane of the weaker areas that will start to pull this thing down. Pull it down slowly, right? And in the beginning, it pulls it down slower and slower, but as we get going and there's more substrate to work with, right? There's a healthier system kind of at a low grade, then we can start to increase more treatments that then help pull that down even more. So we get to this phase, we can start to bring in some of the eye movement therapies. Then we don't start with the eye movement therapies like guns a-blazing. Once again, we start with the, you know, a few, and then we increase them as the patient can handle them. But this is why this process takes time. Because if you start out too quickly, you, in effect, damage the person, right? So it has to be layered and sequenced appropriately to really rebuild the neuron. Once you get down here and you're activating then this is fun, man. When you get down to this area, this level, this is where the real healing begins, right? I mean, you've been healing them all along, but this is where you can really drive these neural pathways and lock it in. So another question you get is, well, I'm starting to feel better. I think I'm good. It's like, well, you're not, because you're here, but you haven't really created enough of these connections, right, between the neurons to satisfy like long-term potential, right? And this is actually what we call this. We call this long-term potentiation. Another fancy word for neuroplasticity. It's all under the neuroplasticity guise, right? Another word for this is synaptogenesis. And another word for this is synaptic arborization. Because it's like a tree.
Building a tree.
Yeah, it's like a tree. Yeah, it's a great. It's actually my favorite one because it's a nice visual. Right, it's pretty.
So when you understand too.
Yes, you could tell people about that. It's like when we're doing this, when a patient asks, like, "What are you doing with this?" I'm growing out the branches of your neurons like a tree in the right pattern that we want you to signal in your brain, or that your brain would normally do. We're not really creating. We're not creating new pathways. These are things that already existed. They just got reorganized after injury or illness or time of doing the wrong thing. And so they send the wrong signal. So we take it and we build the right signal. And when we strengthen the right pathway, the compensating pathways that they built to handle this, they wither away like a tree, right? So if we're growing the branches and the leaves towards the sun, and the other ones that don't really do anything over here because they're in the shade and they got blocked by another tree, they're going to wither away. And the tree is going to put its resources towards the more effective branches and leaves. Okay, so that's kind of it. So you never treat the overactive areas, even though this is overactive. It's still the weaker area, right? But you never treat the compensating pathway if you can help it. You're really trying to treat the source of the issue, because when you treat the underactive, the overactive comes down and goes away. So you're always
overactive. You continue to help, like it continues to function in a way that you don't want it to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and things are overactive because something is underactive.
Makes sense.
Yeah, you get it. So patients will ask you, those types of things like, why does this take a little while, right? And as they should. And can we do this faster? And can I do things at home? This and that, blah blah blah. It's like, well, no, we can't at this point. And even by the time they do things at home, we're pretty much set that neuroplasticity. And there's what you're indicating, which is the layers, right?
Yeah.
That if we just did eye exercises by themselves, they're not as potent to affect this as if we add hyperbaric with it, tilt table, vestibular rehab, chiropractic stimulation, rib expansion for oxygenation, all these different things, PT, percussive rehab, all these things are delivering information and to make this thing super healthy and create way stronger pathways.
Like doing the layers when you're baking. You
Yes,
think about it,
yes.
if you like baking baklava or something like that, and you have to build those layers up, and if you were only to have one layer, it would just fall apart.
Yes, exactly.
So
It is like I love the baking analogy because I'm very passionate about baked goods. But
I like stuff like that. That's what you think, like, oh, it's like baklava,
so it is, and so just like a recipe with this stuff, if you don't use the right recipe and the right combination, in the right layers,
Right.
as you're indicating, in at the right temperature,
Yeah.
right, which is the right, like how strong you cook it at, it's not going to come out it's not going to come out the way you intend it to. It's not going to taste good.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want a good product, you have to build it this way, in these layered fashions, like you said, indicated, like a baking. The other thing is when patients say, you know, hey, I think I'm better. I think I want to, you know, I'm feeling good, and they just started to feel good. You know, can we change our treatment, or can we this and that? It's like, well, we could, but here's why we wouldn't want to yet. It's not much longer, but we need to lock in these changes. Lock in the synaptic arborization. Lock in the neuroplasticity to create long-term potentiation, long-term changes. This is why people in our office don't have to come back for these neurological issues, because we create this long-term change in the right areas. If we, you know, have enough time and we do it frequently enough. Because the other thing that this requires to happen is frequency, right? It has to have this layered frequency, this constant, like, you know, activation and fuel, because these competing pathways that are competing with this, the compensating ones, are very strong, especially if they've been there for a little while, and they will win. So we have to beat them by overworking them, outworking them, is a way you can think about it. Okay, and you have to, and then it takes time. So that's neuroplasticity, right? It takes frequency and plus time. And those two are just, they're the part of the recipe you can't leave out, right? When we're thinking about the recipe for a healthy brain, we need the right area, we need to find the weaker area, we need to do it in that layered fashion, or the appropriate heat, right? The appropriate stimulation level, and we need to do it frequently over time. And then when we do that, the baklava comes out, and it's fantastic, right? And the patient's very happy, and they're restored and recovered. But the reason we can do this is because of in-depth understanding of how the brain works, not what the brain is, not being able to say that's just anatomically correct, but how do these things communicate? This is all about communication in the brain. Everything we're doing is we're rewiring the proper signaling communication in the brain to create the right signals back and forth, so the intended function is clear. And so you have good outcome. In order to do that, you need strong neural pathways between neurons and between the brain and the body, so that signals are quick and they're accurate, and cells can process it quickly, and they're not so close to threshold. We're not just fatiguing, right? They can handle the heavy weight, right? You can give me a busy day and I am good, you know, like I can drive, I can read a bunch, I can go to the department store with all the lights and people, and I can handle it fine, because my brain is processing these things quickly at the right level, right? At the right resting state. I'm not walking around like, you know, or like lights, you know. I'm at a comfortable, calm state, but I can be stimulated. And that's a healthy brain. Cool.
That was a really good